I submitted all my paperwork actually yesterday, so I will be a graduate in nurse midwifery and women's health, hopefully before the end of the month. But I am also a registered nurse and a international board certified lactation consultant. I have done childbirth education, both with Lamaze and Kappa, and I'm also a doula. So I've had a lot of different roles. I chose this topic because as a lactation consultant in the last 5 years, this is the questions I get asked the most when moms call in the postpartum period, other than the initial like, okay, how do I make this work and get over the logistics of just starting to breastfeed? I get a lot of, okay, I'm getting ready to go back to work. What do I do? And for that reason, I wanted to address this topic with you guys today. And if you guys have a specific question, I've left enough time, hopefully at the end of my presentation, that we can address those specific questions for you, because I feel like that's what really matters. So just to get started, let me see. Okay, so we're getting ready to end our maternity leave. So what are we going to do? And the biggest thing I always tell moms is, as much as you can, take as much time off of work as you can. Breastfeeding is very, very much learned. You're working, even if you've done it before, with a brand new partner, and you need at least that full 6 weeks, if not closer to 8 to 10 at least, to really get breastfeeding down and settled and into a good pattern. So as much as you can, if you can take off those, 8 to 12 weeks, I always encourage people to do that. Now I understand financially that doesn't always work out, and that's okay. We can make it successful even without those 8 to 10 weeks. But if you can have that option and you can afford to do it, I always encourage you to. The other thing I always tell moms is, make sure you have practiced with your pump during that time that you're off. I get a lot of moms who are like, okay, I'm about to go back to work and I haven't pumped yet. And I'm like, oh my gosh, because everybody needs to learn how to pump. It is totally different than breastfeeding your baby. And so for some women, the act of pumping or hearing the machine or something like that can prevent you from having letdowns. And so you really have to kind of figure out what's going to work in order for you to be effective at pumping. And there are also some women who have what people have referred to as shy breast. And so for some women, pumping does not ever work and they always get more milk with hand expressing. So it takes some time to really learn how to hand express and be good at it. So if you can throw some pumpings in or practice with your pump here and there throughout your maternity leave before you really start to try to build a stash up, that generally will work a little bit better. Childcare is always super important. And I used to run a home-based daycare. And so I encourage moms, when you're looking for your childcare and who's caring for your baby, that you look for a couple different things in a childcare situation. You want them to be very familiar with how to handle and store your breast milk. You want them to know, how to warm it up so that they're not wasting it, because every ounce sometimes makes a difference for you. You want to make sure that they're comfortable with you coming in and doing lunchtime visits if you want to do that, or breastfeeding at drop off or pickup if you can. And you want to make sure that they understand that bottle feeding for your baby is going to be easier than breastfeeding. So especially if you're getting closer to that 6-week period where you're having to go back to work, I really encourage you to, look for someone who is familiar with something called paced bottle feeding, because the bottle drips, whereas your breast does not always drip. And then the last thing is, always have a trial day before you go back to work. And that's just a day where you drop the baby off, maybe an hour or two later than you would if you were going to your job. And you try to have that time away from your baby to see how pumping goes throughout the day, to see how your provider handles it, to get an idea of when your baby is going to try to get hungry, so you can, maybe adjust your hours a little bit so you can minimize the amount of times that your baby's going to need to eat when you're not there. So pumping is very personal. and picking a breast pump is very personal. So there are several different types of pumps, and you can see I put up pictures of different brands here and different styles. Manual pumps generally do not work if you're going to be routinely separated from your baby because it's just exhausting. It isn't as effective. It doesn't generally have as much suction as the electric pumps do. The double electric pump is what is covered by most insurances. If you go to your insurance's specific website or they'll refer you somewhere, you'll see that you have many options. I tell people look at the specifications of the pump and not all the accessories that come with. It is really easy to buy a cheaper kind of bag to put with your pump and get a better quality pump as opposed to getting a double electric pump that comes with every bell and whistle or the bags and the pads and all that, and then maybe not as good of a quality. And then, of course, there's hospital grade pumps. There is a couple hospital grade pumps that are on the or that are available for personal purchase. And the one that is covered by most insurances is this one that is over here.
Vicky, you're not sharing your screen right now, and I think this would be a perfect time if you want to just hop
Oh,
on. It's
why
okay.
is it not
It's
sharing
been
my screen?
it's been fine up until you started referencing a slide.
Hold on, let me see what is going on. Well, this is not good at all. Why is this not sharing my screen? Ooh. Well, now I don't even know what's going on with Zoom. This is very exciting.
It is absolutely fine. Do you have the share screen button still?
I don't even have, Zoom won't even let me see what's going on here. All right, hold on, let's go back down here. Well, and I'm familiar with this. Oh, yep, here I got it. I got share screen back up. We're good. We're gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. Sorry, y'all.
No, as I said, it's been working beautifully until you started referencing a slide, and we're like, wait a minute, I think she means to have those up.
Well, let me put it up.
Perfect. Yes, we can see. We're on the picking a pump screen.
Perfect. Let's do that. All right. So back to what I was saying. So the only pump that is covered by insurance that is hospital grade is the Spectra pump, and it's the S1 or the S2. But you can also rent these Medela pumps from, I believe, both Curly and New River Valley and also Curly and Roanoke Memorial. I'm not sure if Lewis Gale rents them or not. And then the newest one that's come out that most people is this one that's in the center. And this is the Willow. The biggest complaint I've had with these is that the bags are pricey, but it is hands-free. It just slides down into your bra and you can pump without being attached to any cords, which for people who are in things like waitressing or medical providers, this has been really beneficial because they can have it on and still be doing their job while they're pumping. No matter what pump you choose, you really need to make sure you get sized for your flanges. And the flange of the pump is this part right here. And what you want to see when you hold the flange up to your breast is you want to see a small ring of areola tissue around your nipple in the flange. And that is because you want your nipple to move freely, but if it's too big, it will not be effective in getting the milk out. It doesn't do a good job of compressing. And if it's too small, it's going to be painful and damage your nipple. So everybody has different sizing for your nipples, and it's entirely possible to have different sizing between your two breasts. And so for that reason, if you have the opportunity or if you have your pump and you're going to the hospital, since they're not doing outpatient services right now at most because of COVID, take your pump with you so that you can have someone look and kind of size your flanges so that you have the right size flanges on hand before you need to start pumping. And then the other thing that a lot of moms have come back and said, I really wish I had known, is ordering extra valves or parts to have on hand. So sometimes you'll forget, you'll take your parts home at night and you'll wash them and you'll get up the next morning and you'll forget, like the Medela pump has these little tiny white valves and you'll forget those. And then your pump doesn't have any suction at work. And so what I think is really helpful is to sometimes order those extra parts. The Spectra pump has this backflow protector valve, and there's this little tiny thing that attaches to the tube right here, and they roll. And so I've had moms before who have dropped these, and then this breaks off. And again, then you can't attach anything, and you're back to pumping one side at a time. So look at your pump and see what kind of parts they recommend, having replacements for every couple months, or look at the parts and consider ordering some extras of those, because you don't want to try to rush those orders in and not have something for a few days if you can. So when this is a big question I get asked, when do I start pumping? And the answer is about a month before you go back to work. I recommend you start throwing in like one pumping a day, and there's alternative ways to do it. So I put a bunch of options here on this slide for you, but some people will like wake up a little bit earlier than the baby does, and then they'll pump right first thing in the morning, or they'll pump one side while they feed the other, or they'll pump just after feeding, or like they'll wait an hour and then pump. But the key with all of this is that when you start pumping your milk for your baby, you're taking, at that point, your supply has been established to what your baby needs. And so if you think about your breast as like, this is my little factory and this is my little status quo, and now you're taking a little bit more milk out and your factory has to kind of catch up. So then your baby will often eat a little bit closer together, just like they did at that growth spurt that's around 3 weeks, where they're eating and you're like, we just fed you an hour ago and you've been going 2 hours. What's going on? And it's because you're taking that little bit of extra out and your body's playing catch up. So I like to let moms know ahead of time, like, hey, when you start pumping, you're going to see that your baby's going to eat more, but that's what you want, is for your baby to be eating more, because that tells your body to make more. So that will help you kind of get that extra supply going. The next thing I always talk about is storing and prepping. And for breastfeeding as a whole, so your milk changes in its components throughout the day, not a whole lot, but a little bit. And so, and there's more fore milk in the earlier parts of the day, and, or sorry, I got that backwards, more hind milk. So the fattier milk in the earlier parts of the day, and then it kind of gets a little bit thinner as you've done stuff throughout the day, and there tends to be a little bit more fore milk. And so if you can put your milk in the fridge first, then everything you pump for those 24 hours, you can combine it and then portion it out into the bottle sizes. So most of the time, you're going to be freezing in like somewhere between 3 to 6 ounce bottles for your baby, but you want to have a few bags of 1 to 2 ounce volumes, because there will be a time where your baby will be like, say, consistently drinking 3 ounces, but is getting ready to work its way up to 4. And the last thing you want to do is thaw out 3 ounces and have your baby drink 1. So having those couple bags that are those smaller 1 ounce to 2 ounce portions minimizes the amount of milk that you're going to end up wasting in the long run. I always tell people, if you can, lay it flat in the freezer. And what a lot of people find is that the Glad or Ziploc storage containers that are bigger, you can lay them flat and stack a bunch of bags in there. And that way, when you are getting ready to like rotate your milk through your freezer, you're not having to pull every bag out to put the newest in the back. You can just switch your big Ziploc containers out. And it makes it much easier, as opposed to looking through all of these individual bags over here to be like, which one's the oldest? And that way you're kind of grouping it together a little bit. And then leave it in the freezer until you're pretty much ready to use it. So if you need to, say your provider wants it thawed the day of or whatever, pull it out the night before so that you have that full 24 hours to use it. Again, just to try to minimize your waste. Um, and if you're freezing it in these smaller portions and flatter, then when you put it in the warm water to warm up, it actually doesn't take as long to thaw either. So if you have a home-based provider or a facility that is okay, it's always nice to leave like an extra bottle or two of milk in their freezer so that if your baby for some odd reason has like a particularly high needs day or drinks a little bit more, you're not like, oh, I'm sending exactly what they need, or I have to thaw out extra and send extra every day. So if you can, give your provider just like 1 or 2 extra bags of milk to just throw in their freezer. So everyone always asks, okay, how often do I need to pump? And the short answer to that is roughly every 3 hours is recommended, but it varies. So you'll notice too that, like some people, especially if you are a person who does not do as well with pumping, you may have to pump more frequently. And if you're a person who pumps and gets a lot of milk, you may not have to pump as often. So there's several schedules kind of listed here to give you an idea, but shorter and more frequent pumping sometimes is more productive than having those longer stretches. So talk to your employer and make sure they know you're breastfeeding. Under the law, it is required that they give you 20-minute unpaid breaks every 4 hours in Virginia right now, is the law. So, and that does not count your lunch. So if you look, you can probably pump if you're working a typical 8 to 5 day mid-morning, so around 10 or 11, and then around lunchtime, 12 to 1, and then again in the afternoon. And then just you'll see there's like variations of this a little bit, but there you go. You want to try to pump. I thought this was really insightful from a mom when she said it, and I've always shared this now. But if you can, pump before you feel full. So what she said is, I felt full and it made me feel really good because I was like, okay, yes, I'm making milk for my baby. This is great. I'm doing great. But what it does is it's signaling your body that you don't need that milk because it's sitting in your breast. So pumping a little bit before you feel full, if possible, actually tells your body, I need that milk, and it keeps your production up. Um, the other thing I hear from moms is that a lot of times, like say you're working a typical Monday through Friday job, is that on Monday they're pumping a lot more than they are on Friday. And the reason is that your baby has breastfed all weekend a lot of times. And so your milk supply is up because your baby removes more milk than the pump does. And then as the week goes on and you've done more pumping, your supply will start to. And it's not that your supply has dropped off to a point where it's not making enough. It's just that it's gone down like, a couple ounces over the course of a week. So that tends to be very common as well. For individuals. So that may be a situation where you may need to throw an extra pumping in or pump once over the weekend to kind of compensate for that if you notice that that schedule is kind of happening with you. And then how much do I need? So ideally, before you go back to work, you want to have at least 2 days worth of milk in the freezer for your baby. But if possible, I encourage you to try to aim for about a week's worth of milk. And the reason I say that is because when you go back to work, you are returning to work, let's say 6 weeks after your baby's born or 8 weeks after your baby's born. And every single thing that has happened at your job while you are gone, you walk in that first day, you open your email folder and you're like, oh my gosh, I have 1,000 emails. And your stress level just goes up. Or everyone's coming at you with everything that you've missed for those weeks you've been off. And you're like, and we know stress impacts your ability to make milk or to pump milk. And so it's very overwhelming, especially when you go back that first week. So for that reason, if you can, try to return with like 1 or 2 days and then have a couple days off with your baby. Because that first couple days that you're back at work can be very overwhelming and stressful. I mean, you're already hormonal because you're leaving your baby with someone else and you're pumping and you have all the things from work coming in. So that's kind of a guideline. So aim for 2 days to a week worth of milk beforehand. Um, and then milk, as far as what your baby should be taking in, that varies so greatly depending on who you ask. So the old rule of thumb was 2.5 to 3 ounces per pound of body weight per day. And then you divide that by the number of feedings your baby has. So say you have an 8-pound baby, they need somewhere between 21 to 24 ounces of milk a day. Say they're eating 8 times a day, that gives them 2.5 to 3 ounces at a feeding. Um, but then we have these babies, as you all know, breastfed babies can be long and lean and they can be roly-polies and they can put on a lot of weight really fast. And so you have these babies who are only a couple months old, but may weigh 15 pounds and they may not need that amount of milk. So a good other school of thought is, 2 to 4 ounces per feeding until they're about 12 weeks old, and then somewhere around 4 to 5 ounces until they get to about 6 months old. Um, some babies will never eat more than 5 ounces at a feeding, and other babies may go up to 8. So that's again where it's kind of nice to have those extra ounce or two in bags because, say, again, you have a baby who's rolling along at this amount, and all of a sudden they have a growth spurt, they need this amount. You can warm up just that little bit without wasting. And then there are those other babies like mine who decided if I wasn't going to be there, he wasn't going to eat, or he would eat just the bare minimum. And then he would power nurse all night long to make up for it, which was fine. So you may find that your baby kind of flip flops their schedule because they want the milk fresh from the tap. And that's also very typical and normal. It's not that you're doing anything wrong, it's just how some babies work. So as far as increasing your supply, breastfeed as much as you can. So breastfeed just before you leave for work, breastfeed as soon as you get home from work. And then remember that what you're pumping out is not what your baby is able to get out when breastfeeding. It was proven that pumps are maybe 60 to 70% as efficient as your baby. And so say you're pumping a couple ounces, your baby may be getting closer to 3 or 4, and it just depends. Now, there's a whole thing about galactagogues, and you'll see a lot of discussions about these online. These are things like herbs or foods that may increase your milk supply, and you see lots of discussions and recommendations for these online. I use them cautiously. Ultimately, the biggest thing that increases your supply is removing milk from your breast more often. But there is times when galactagogues are important. The issue is that they are herbs or foods, and for some people, they may cause problems medically. So if you feel like you need to add something in to help increase your supply, discuss it first with either a lactation consultant or your healthcare provider, because the last thing we want to do is cause health issues in you by using something that is not appropriate. So, and if you are using a galactagogue, sometimes there's like an option that has multiple ingredients. And for some people, those work a lot better than one of those single ingredient ones. So your lactation consultant may be able to look at your health history and then say, well, maybe you want to try this one because it has this and this and this. So, but again, it's not something I recommend starting or just adding in without discussing it with someone first. So my key takeaways for you is that you can do this. It sounds very overwhelming and it sounds like there's a lot of planning, and there is a lot of planning and there is a lot of commitment to it. But ultimately, you can do this. It is not an impossible task to breastfeed for an entire year or whatever your goal is for your baby and work. You have support available to you. That is, there is lactation by phone at the hospitals in our area right now. There are private practice lactation consultants. There are La Leche League of Roanoke around if you need help from a mom or just want another perspective. And then the last thing I always tell moms is success is very dependent on you as a person. And so some moms find that, the pump just doesn't do it for them and they choose to do a partial weaning or they choose to add a little formula in. And that's not a failure because any breastfeeding is still breastfeeding. And so what is successful for you may not be what is successful for somebody else. And that's really important to know. And so don't I hate mom guilt more than anything. It's like my pet peeve. Formula was invented for a reason. There's a purpose for it. And if you need it, it is okay to use. It does not mean you have failed at breastfeeding. Thank you. If you guys need anything outside of this, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is here. I know it's also in like the summit resources. And I appreciate you all coming today. I wanted to make sure I left time for questions for you guys. So if you have any, please let me know.
That's wonderful. Vicki, thank you so much. And I just sent a reminder in the chat. Please use the Q&A function if you have some questions for Vicki, and we can feed those to her. So far, we don't have any, Vicki. I've been keeping an eye on it for you.
Okay. Are any of you guys that are attending right now in the process of going back to work, having just gone back to work? Getting ready to have a baby?
I can say for sure, Vicki. So my pumping experience was 10 years ago, and it looks like the pumps have come a long way, which is great. And I did not know that you got 20 minutes every 4 hours by law. I think that also might be a change in the past decade. So that's
It
supportive, while it could be maybe more supportive. Like, it would be nice if that was paid, but yeah,
Yeah.
good to know
So
as a mom.
it changed. It used to be 10 years ago when you were pumping at work, it used to be that they had to allow you reasonable breaks,
Absolutely.
which is random and like really up to the employer. So some employers would read that as like a 20-minute unpaid break, and other employers were reading that as like you get 5 minutes, like a smoke break.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember only being able to pump once a day, like once during my work period. So,
Yeah. So
yeah.
that changed with uh the working, like the not the FMLA Act, but one of the other family medical acts that came along. It changed and became more standardized, and the way it's written, and it varies by state still, but the way Virginia has interpreted that is 20 minutes every 4 hours, which is
Yeah.
very
Still much improved. Yeah.
so much improved.
I also noticed, and of course, this was me just pumping once per shift. Nothing can simulate the baby on you.
Nothing
Like,
does.
yeah. So the baby is like the best producer of your milk. And so one of the things that I would do is, when I was with my baby before work and after work, I would just have them on me as much as possible. Like, and it was also bonding, but that helped my production stay high too. That whenever I was away, at least I had that stimulation from our time together.
I I recommend that to everyone. And in the early days of pumping, or in the beginning of your pumping journey, a lot of times, sometimes it sounds really weird, but put your hands-free pumping bra on and just kind of tuck it below your other breast and latch your baby, because sometimes it's really hard. Now, pumps have come a long way from even where you were 10 years ago, but there are some that still, make that, and for some moms, that is very disconcerting and really inhibits their letdown. And so pumping when you have your baby attached to the other breast will allow you to have that letdown and start to kind of, I don't want to say train, but kind of associate it in your brain, so that when the pump turns on, you're not struggling with that at work, because that's a real
Absolutely.
thing
Yeah.
to have
And then
happen.
you get to the point where when you hear it, you let down automatically because you start to get that conditioning.
Yeah. And
Right.
it is. It's so conditioned, but And it's so funny because like my pumping journey was, and I mean, I'm dating myself here, but 20 years ago, and pumps sucked. I mean, like, first off, they weren't covered by insurance. So that was horrible. So you had to buy one. And then I was pumping with a single pump at work. And I mean, it was just, and I tell people it's not breastfeeding your baby. It is, but I mean, you're doing it for a reason, but it's not the same as like just, whipping a boob out and latching a baby at that point. And so you do have to be dedicated to do it. However, it is also super beneficial to know, okay, I'm still providing this care for my baby, even though I'm not there.
Absolutely. No, it's interesting that you say dedicated because you're right. It's easy, especially like when I was only doing it once a day. It was easy to think, I'm just going to work through this and not do it today because it felt like a chore almost to like take the break, put that time aside. Um, and so you do have to keep in your head very upfront that this is for your baby and you're doing a huge positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
And
other thing the other thing I didn't put in my lecture, but I often will tell moms is that you can take your pump parts, your flanges and your valves and all that, and throw them in a Ziploc bag throughout the day and not necessarily wash them between pumpings, as long as you store them in the refrigerator with your milk. So like just a quick, like, I hate to say paper towel wipeout, but paper towel wipeout without having to do, so you don't spend your 20 minutes washing pump parts.
yeah, no, fair. Yeah.
Because that can
Um,
get super tedious as well
it's
to
true. Yeah,
have to wash
the
your pump parts.
cleanup adds to the time that you needed to pump. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I also there were two things that really helped me. One was my comfort level because you're now in the space that you normally had compartmentalized for work. And at some time during that day, you're going to go to an area, and although it's protected for you, you're basically taking your top off or lifting up the top. You're revealing yourself to pump, and so you have to get that comfort level that like this is something I need to do, and I'm going to do this every day. um, I also had tried to multitask during pumping where I would like type with one hand while I was pumping. And I noticed that if I just stop and actually took it as a break, I produced way more.
You do.
Yeah.
You do. Um, and a lot of times people find too, like, if they put up a video or a recording of their baby, um, and now, of course, with technology, I feel like you can almost check in on your baby full time. It's fine. That often will help too, as far as like helping you get that connection in downtime. I had a coworker who would FaceTime and talk to her baby every time she would pump, and that worked really well for her. So sometimes I think just, remember that it's an unpaid break, is what I like to say. You're not getting paid to answer your emails at that point, especially if you're hour. Now, if you're
Fair point.
salary, it's, whatever. But if you're hourly, if they're making you clock out and take it as an unpaid break, take it as an unpaid break and use it as a break because you need that time.
Those are wonderful points. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. This is it's a tricky situation for moms, and I'm so glad that the attendees and the people who can watch this recording can learn from your advice and insights on breastfeeding and going back to work. Do you
And
have anything you want to wrap up with before I wrap up our time?
no, I mean, I think, I hope if you guys have questions or concerns, you reach out. And again, if you have something that is like super personal or whatever, my cell phone number is here. Feel free to reach out to me over cell phone. I do answer messages, not normally at 2 in the morning, but I do. Um, and then, if you need support from someone else, just like I said, there's so many resources right now in the Roanoke area for breastfeeding help or answering questions. So please reach out and use us. We love to hear from you guys, and that's what really matters.
Vicki, thank you so much. This concludes our live webinar on how to be successful going back to work while breastfeeding. We appreciate, Vicki, you taking the time to present to us, and Huddle Up Moms appreciates our audience for joining us in this session. We would like to thank our summit sponsors, Dr. John Harding and Star Lactation, for their support in our resource summit and supporting moms in the Roanoke Valley. We hope that you're able to continue participating in the other sessions offered today. All of them will be recorded and will be available after our summit today. So thank you, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day. Vicki, thank you again.
You all have a good one.